Now, we did have a question that came in via email. I am, of course, sitting on two other presentations, one from Bill, which is going to show and discuss a comparison of collars and collar structures, and another one for John related to analyzing a married put position. But today, Scott sent in a question. He said, I have some searches set up for puts. I was trying to figure out how to set up the search so it would look at the equity moving down and a squeeze of the Bollinger Band. Okay, well, we can use different filters in Power Options in the technicals to find declining and downtrending stocks, of course. And we'll use the Bollinger Band features, the percent bandwidth, and perhaps even what's known as the percent BB20 in order to see a squeeze that's happening with the Bollinger Band, or a condensing of the Bollinger Band as well. Now, all that being said, let's go ahead and navigate over to Power Options, and let's see what we can do for Scott related to this search for puts. And I'm assuming, Scott, you're referring to long puts, buying puts, that is, of course. So we're going to take a look at that, but we're going to do some other clearing of the filters. So I want to go into the search. I'm going to search across the universe of options to find put positions for Scott where the stock are declining and we're seeing a squeeze of the Bollinger Band. So let's just go to long put first. But before we do anything, and we're going to go into the search, before we jump into the criteria, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, I want to go here to our more information button. I want to go to charts, and we're going to go to big charts. Now, this isn't what he's specifically looking for, but what I wanted to illustrate here with United Steel is the term that he's referring to as the Bollinger Band. Now, the Bollinger Bands, of course, are shown here. You can see that I have my settings set up to look at the 20-day moving average. Oh, that's a terrible pen color on this background. 1 second, folks. Let me get something a little bit brighter. Yeah, let's go ahead and go with the yellow. I'm sorry. So we have the SMA 20 set up, and we have the Bollinger Bands selected as well. Also the MACD, the RSI, and further down, the volume. And I'm looking at just a 3-month chart selection. That's how I set up big charts. It's pretty much how Ernie sets it up as well. These here are the illustrations of the Bollinger Bands, the 20-day Bollinger Band ranges. And as you can see, when we're up, stock is rising up, it's going to be hitting against the upper Bollinger Band. And when you have a wide swing, a sudden movement, the upper band, strength band, and the lower band get very wide. But then after time, things settle down, and we're looking for a position here where the Bollinger Bands are condensed. In other words, this Bollinger Band width, what I mentioned, the percent bandwidth, is really small for US Steel right now. Back here, it was really wide. Here, it was starting to gap up and get a little wider. Then we had the large move, and then we have the condensing here. So the bandwidth, percent bandwidth, I should say, Scott, is relation to the width of the bands apart from one another relative to the stock. Also, you're going to be looking for a position, this is why I mentioned we might use the percent BB20, where it's somewhere near the 50% range. It's right in the middle. The stock prices are sort of right in the middle of that Bollinger Band. I'm going to tell you right now, we may have some issues finding both of your concerns, desires, requirements. What I mean by that, if the stock is declining and moving down, we're going to be peaking on the lower end of the Bollinger Band, and the upper band might be hanging up here. That being said, if those ones are available where the Bollinger Band has not gotten slightly wider, but it is condensing after or in a decline, of course, the Power Options tool is going to find them. But what filters would we use? Well, let's go ahead now back to the search tool on Power Options. And this is just our default search looking at Bollinger Bands. So what we're looking at on the default search itself is we're looking for positions that are at the lower ends of their Bollinger Band. This is the percent BB20, where if I'm at 90 or above, that means the stock is riding up at the top of that upper Bollinger Band. Less than 5, we're looking for stocks that have been declining, as we saw in the last few days, US Steel was, and is close to that lower Bollinger Band, hopefully looking for a Bollinger Band breakout to the downside for buying put positions in advance, potentially, of a decline. For now, though, before we do anything else, we're going to have to go ahead and clear the filters. We're just going to wipe everything out. We're just going to go into the options first, and I'm just going to put in some very basics to buy puts for declining stocks. I don't want to buy a weekly. I don't want to buy a 0-day to expiration. I want to give myself some time for the stock to move, hopefully, in my desired direction, thinking that it's going to continue to decline downwards. So I'm going to give myself a good, maybe, let's just say 50 to 75 days at a time. Usually our default's about 75 to 90, 3.5, 4 months out in time, but we'll just go with 50 to 75. And I'm not going to worry too much about in the money or out of the money, but I am going to look for at least some liquidity on the option today and a reasonable open interest. And I'm going to look for a lower implied volatility range. This is where the implied volatility of the option is now compared to where it has been over the life of the option since it's been released on the market. I don't want to pay too high into an implied volatility naturally, and that usually, if there's a high implied volatility, would signal that the move had happened, the downward move had happened, and the implied volatility is very high and the option is overpriced. Let's just keep this less than 65 for now. Okay? Do you want to keep some range in or out of the money? I probably don't want to go too far out of the money, and I maybe want to go 1 or 2 strikes in the money. So let's just go ahead and say that we want to be maybe 1 to 3 strikes in the money for buying the puts. All fair. Simple expiration time frame, looking for lower implied volatility range. We could also use IV over HV to look for options that aren't too overvalued. We'll get into that maybe later. And just a couple strikes in the money. We could use delta, of course. We could use percent to double, but we're just going to leave it at that. Now to the technicals. We want a stock that's moving down. There's multiple ways we can do that. I can simply look for stocks that are trading below their SMA 20, SMA 50. I could look for stocks where the stock and the 20-day is below the 50 or the 100, or look for stocks where the 20 days below the 50 is below the 100, so on and so forth. Let's try that. Let's do stock in SMA 20 below the SMA 50. Now, I can also look for stocks where they have crossed above or below the SMA 20, the number of days that it's been down. But we're not looking for something that's been down an extended number of days, are we? Scott's question was something that is moving down and is having a squeeze of the Bollinger Band. If something's been moving down consistently or has been moving down below the SMA 20 for 10, 15, or 20 days, the Bollinger Band width is probably going to be wider in those cases. So we're just going to leave it looking for declining stocks where the stock in the 20-day moving average is below the 50 for right now. Now the bandwidth. We talked about it. We wanted to condense. This is similar to that percent BB20 in relation to 100% being at the upper band, being near 0% is that lower band. But this is the comparison of the 20-day moving average and the stock prices between the upper and lower bands. So we typically want to see something of consolidation period. Right here in the pop help, it says we want to look for something that's maybe less than 20. Well, let's try less than 15. Now, at the same time, I mentioned I might not want something that's up at the top of the upper Bollinger Band, even though we're in a condensing period, Scott, or down near the bottom. U.S. Steel was, which might be an opportunity for you. But I might want to be right in the middle. And to isolate that, we're going to use that percent BB20, where again, if 100 we're up near the upper band, 0 we're near the lower band. Let's try something just 35 to 65. Try to isolate it right in the middle near 50%. I don't want to do something like 49 to 51 because there's going to be very few stocks that match that. But we're going to start with a range of the percent BB20, where the 20-day moving average of the stock price is in relation to the upper and lower band, while making a tighter bandwidth here. I'm going to try less than 15 with stocks that are trading below the SMA 50 and the 20-day moving average is also below the SMA 50. So we've got gold, TLT, and GLD. Let's take a look here and see if this is what you're looking for. There we go. So the stock's trending down, but it's only 1 or 2 days. It's been moving up, so this isn't a strong trend. Maybe we should add that other, but again, problem here is we only saw 2 or 3 stocks that came up on the list with this limited criteria. Let's take a look at the other one, TLT. Or, yeah, let's take a look at TLT. Yeah, so this one just started a downward trend. Maybe I should just use a different one. Let's use something lighter. And I thought this was going to be helpful for us, but I want to use something lighter right now. This was the downtrend here that you probably were looking for, but it wasn't condensing as you wanted. I want to change the technicals real quick. And I'm going to take this out. No, I'm going to leave that in. But I'm just going to look for stocks that are trading below the SMA 20. A number of days, stock up or down. Let's say we want to be down at least 3 days. Let's try that. Lighten this one up a little bit to be not as restrictive. And at the same time, look for stocks that have been down at least 3 days. Maybe we want to limit the upside, but we'll take a look at what results we get. Let's see if we get some more in there. None. And we have been in a strong market, so that's been a little bit difficult. Now again, let's take out this 35 to 65. Let's open that up a little bit, but it might not be what we want. Just want to see if we get any results here. And again, now we've got the banking ETF. Does this match what we're looking for? Too far. That's what I was afraid of. By removing that isolation of the Bollinger Band range to be near that 50%, the percent BB20, Scott, my apologies, we've got positions that have broken below where we wanted to see. And in this case, the Bollinger Band width is getting wider than what you initially wanted. For this banking ETF, the condensation period was in here when it was actually moving up and volatility was getting smaller. Maybe back here as well, right before it started this sort of scale movement, it looks like. But again, there's not too much there. One other thing we could do, of course, is look at further expirations or just a standard monthly. Let's take out the 50 to 75. Let's clear out our drawings as well. Let's just go to April. Maybe that's part of the problem. We weren't seeing April expiration because I'd selected 75. But we should have seen all the Marches come up. Let's see if we got anything in April. That's a little bit better. So now we've got a bigger list here. Let's narrow that down once again. I want to go back to our percent BB20 to condense that width. I think that's important for what you're looking for, as you can tell, with keeping the stock below the SMA 20 and stock days down. Maybe I should only go, let's go 1 to 3. So it hasn't been broken down below that Bollinger Band with an extended decline of 3, 5, or 6 days. Okay. Morgan Stanley. Why not? Let's take a look. Does this match what you're looking for, Scott? I think it's close. It was closer here. I'll admit that. This is probably something along the lines you're looking for. You had this condensation period here. The Bollinger Bands are getting tighter than they were. The SMA 20, the stock had just dropped below that by 1 or 2 days. And there's this downturn. Now what are we seeing? It's starting to condense back again. And the stock has been down 1, 2, almost 3 days in a row. A little pop up today. And of course, you see the other thing I'd normally look for in this situation, but I didn't want to make it too restrictive, is that we're sort of seeing not as pronounced a negative MACD I always like. I'd like to see the MACD still declining in this case, where it's starting to get closer together now. The divergence, I'm sorry, the EMA 9 line is starting to get closer to the MACD line 1226. So it's questionable, but it's close. Now here's one that you see where it's moving up. I just wanted to point this out. Here's a condensing period where the stock is moving up. And, you know, that's sort of what we got near here too, but it wasn't moving up too much. It just started that same decline, and then you had this move downwards. But the condensing period here that we had suddenly between the Bollinger Bands, little tried to pop back up, but it didn't quite work, did it? So that's kind of an interesting one there as well. Now, let's just take a look at the next one, Occidental. Pretty decent. I think this is what you're kind of looking for. What are we seeing? Occidental had a good run up here. As we can see, this sort of started trending down. Then we had a downward movement here. But right now, where are we? Getting into that condensing period here with the Bollinger Bands. At the same time, the stock has been declining 3 or 4 days. We do have a positive MACD crossover here, but look, it's starting to get a little bit closer, where the positive MACD 1226 is starting to get closer and closer. The Occidental might be something that's interesting here along the lines of what you were hoping, I think, to see, where we have A, the condensing Bollinger Bands, stock is declining, still in a downtrend, of course, dropping below the SMA 20. Just for one more, let's see if we've kind of matched other things that we were looking for. Royal Caribbean, Morgan Stanley we looked at. Let's look at Royal Caribbean, why not? I think Ernie just opened this as a married put in the Fusion portfolio, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a big condensing period. It's getting really close. What do you want to say? The stock's been sort of stagnating but moving up, but it's been really in this tight range for a good almost month period of about 122, 121. Had a little peak almost up to 134 and came back to earth and is right around 125. You've got that, as you mentioned, very tight Bollinger Band range. Stock is declining by at least 2 days after this big pop-up. We had a decline and then another decline today. And of course, we take a look at the MACD. Is that showing us what we'd expect? Yeah, it looks like it just sort of had a weakness here. And the MACD line is breaking below the EMA 9 a little bit more. RSI is starting to drop from maybe 55 or 60 down to the 50 line. Of course, this is on strong volume as well. So Scott, I think those two are what you were looking for. When we looked at Occidental, Royal Caribbean, why not? We're here. Let's take a look at Ovintiv, see if that's similar to what you're looking for. Yeah, again, peaked up here, starting to decline. You see the MACD is starting to drop near, and you're starting to get closer to a Bollinger Band condensing period. And after this long run down, you see the Bollinger Bands got really wide again as it was flirting with the bottom. Started to condense here as it moved up. We had a movement down and it's starting to move back up, and then we're starting to drop back down below the SMA 20. We're starting to get the condensing period. All right. So I think those are kind of what you're looking for, those types of stocks. You wanted to see more securities. The things you could, of course, do is open this up a little bit more. You could open up the time frame for expiration. You could take out the percent implied volatility range if you wanted to. You could widen the strikes. But in general, I think these are the base criteria you're looking for. The percent BB20. I'm going to isolate that to close to 50%. 40 to 60 might be okay, but I think that might be too restrictive. Start with 35 to 65. The important target for you is the percent bandwidth below the 15 or 20%. I used 15 to make it a little bit more restrictive. We could probably open it up by going less than 20% to look for the condensing Bollinger Bands. Stock less than the SMA 20. Thinking back, that was probably a wiser choice to use, as we can see anyway with some results we had here, Scott. The reason why I say that is because the market was really ramping up, as we know, in the end of December. So we had some strong securities. January, we still had some strong movement. Hesitation, but we still had some strong movement. So not a lot of stocks would be below their 50-day moving average necessarily. Although, with recent pullbacks and recent weaknesses, condensing consolidation periods, as you mentioned, we might start to see a few more of those pop up. And then we looked for stocks to be down 1, 2 to 3 days, maybe not more than 3 days. Maybe that was a bad choice initially on my part because they're too far down, and that increases the Bollinger Band width. That's the one thing that I was first afraid of, that looking for stocks that are in a strong decline, naturally that Bollinger Band width is going to be wider. But here we could find positions that are down 1 to 3 days, still below the 20-day moving average in a consistent downtrend, and then that percent bandwidth 20 to look for the consolidation period of the Bollinger Bands. And I kind of want the stock to be sort of in the middle of the Bollinger Bands as well. Now think about that. 6 basic criteria. Time frame, yeah, the implied volatility range, limited to strikes in the money 1 to 3. You could look out of the money, Scott, if you wanted to. As I mentioned, you could use delta, percent range out of the money, percent range in the money, and some basic liquidity. isolating it to the Bollinger Band, the percent BB20 to be around 50. So it's right in the middle of the two bands or close to it. And that bandwidth, you want it to be less than 15. And we wanted stocks in a downtrend below the SMA 20. And it worked out best to look for stocks that are down 1 to 3 days. You could take that out too, and that would probably open up the search results more. But across the entire universe of options, yes, we're only looking at April expiration. We might be able to open it up if we just go to March, because not every optionable stock may have an April series right now, but everyone will have March. It doesn't open it up that much. It's only 18 results still with Royal Caribbean, Occidental. We get Illinois Tools in there now. Truist Financial is in there. And probably on the next page is where that, Perion that we saw. Prudential Financial Network is in there also, and a biopharmaceutical. Okay, so those are the settings that I would look for. Those are the settings I would start to use, and you can just start to tweak them as you need. Looking for the percent BB20 between 35 to 65, percent bandwidth 20 less than 15, stocks in a downtrend below the SMA 20. Of course, you could use the just below the SMA 50. We saw that stock and SMA 20 below the SMA 50 restricted the results a little too much. And down 1 to 3 days, so just a recent slight downturn with, quote unquote, the Bollinger Band squeeze with these settings. And then you can adjust the option criteria any way you want to after that point too. These are just some examples of what we would want to see for doing those positions. All right, so Scott, I hope that answers your question. You'll have this as a reference to use at any time. Remember, we have our default Bollinger Band screen that Ernie created looking for stocks that have had maybe or close to a recent lower Bollinger Band breakout, and then just the basic initial values. And then, of course, as in with every search, I should say, in the sample searches view for long puts, you got the Bollinger Band breakout, current option volume, where the total option volume today is greater than the average of the last 90 days, and stocks in a downtrend with low broker ratings. So those are some other themed searches that you can use, as you can use in any search as a starting point or stepping stone to create your search. But for what we were talking about, Scott, there, those settings we were using initially, that'd be the ones that you'd want to use, I think, to really maximize what you were looking for, get as close as possible, and then you can fine tune and tweak the options criteria to open it up more, restrict it more. But again, using that percent bandwidth of 35 to 65, I'm sorry, of less than 15, my apologies, using the percent BB20, it's somewhere between 40 to 60 or 35 to 65, so that the 20-day moving average and the stock prices are in the middle of that Bollinger Band, right in the middle, not too near the top or too near the bottom. And last but not least, of course, stocks down 1 to 3 days as well. Now, I did make an error. I forgot to save the search, so let's just run through this real quick. Does this mean this is a good screen to use? I'm not sure, but we saw that it did work. Unfortunately, I didn't save it, so now very briefly, I've got to recreate that search. I meant to save it before I went to the default searches, and I forgot. So let's clear the filters again. I'm going to stick with that 1 month out March series. I'm going to keep my implied volatility less than 65%. I was going to use the strikes in the money 1 to 3. I'm not going to use one result per security. And our basic technicals, again, 35 to 65 for the percent BB20. Bollinger Band width, percent bandwidth less than 20. Stock below the SMA 20. And we wanted the stocks to be down 1 to 3 days. All right. Now what should we see? Occidental, Morgan Stanley, Trust Financial, Royal Caribbean, Illinois Tool Works. There's Ovintiv again. Great